We do have a change in the program right at the outset. Cardinal Tolentino, who had planned to be with us, has been called away on short notice to participate in the Jubilee celebration of the Curia, and he very much regrets he cannot be with us. We're very fortunate, however, that Father Antonio Spadaro, Undersecretary of the Dicastery, will be stepping in instead into conversation with my colleague Paul Eli, a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center, frequent contributor to The New Yorker, and author of 3 books that address the encounter of religion and the arts, including the recently published The Last Supper, an exploration of faith, culture, and politics in the 1980s. Father Spadaro has served as editor of La Civiltà Cattolica and was a longtime and close collaborator of Pope Francis, accompanying him on travels around the world. He is, as I mentioned, a close friend of Georgetown and has served on our Georgetown Board of Directors. There's no one more qualified to explore with us Francis's ideas about human fraternity, social friendship, and the culture of encounter, valuable resources as we imagine together ways forward in a divided world. So please join me in welcoming Paul and Antonio to the podium.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Pankaj. Thanks to everyone else who's taken a hand in bringing us all together. Now, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say that it really matters to know that the Catholic Church and the Vatican is a place where literature is spoken and where literature is understood. And in my experience, I've gained that knowledge through knowledge of people. Cardinal Tolentino is a published poet and essayist. Bishop Tai, who will be with us later in the day, I understand, is a longtime subscriber to the London Review of Books, and I often learned about new work from him in Rome and discussed writers that I was just coming to know in the United States that he was already onto, among them Sally Rooney. And then there's Father Spadaro, who is a formidable reader and writer in several languages. And so just to begin with the particular, we'll have plenty of abstractions over the next few days. I'd like to just begin with our first encounter and how the conversation we're having today is in a formal expression of a dialogue that's been going on informally for almost 20 years.
Thank you for asking me to give the start of this conversation with Paul. Sorry for my awful English. I was just asked to give this talk, and I think that I can share with you what I experienced with Pope Francis, because with Pope Francis, everything was an experience, not just a matter of theoretical inquisition or investigation. Even when we thought about very deep things, his own personal experience was involved. And literature means to be involved in life. To tell you the truth, when I asked him, I met him for the first time in Santa Marta for the very famous masses. And at the end, I greeted him. But the very first meeting was by phone. So I was going to give a talk at 7 o'clock, I still remember, in the Collegio Capranica here in Rome. And when I received a phone call from an unknown number, and I didn't know what to do, to answer or not. And finally, I decided to answer. and on the other side, I heard the voice, "Ciao, sono Papa Francesco." So I had a stroke just before a conversation, in a formal conversation in Collegio Capranica. So at some point I started babbling and I said, well, how can I call you, Holy Father? And he said, don't worry about that, let's talk. And then we talked, then we met in Santa Marta. Finally, we met also with all the writers of Civiltà Cattolica in our community. But before, we had a 20 minutes chat when he gave me a mission. But I put him a question. And the question was, do you want to make an interview with me for La Civiltà Cattolica? His answer was, no way. I will not give interviews during my pontificate. And because I'm not able to answer to the question in an interview. Well, you know the end of the story. And so, you know, probably that interview changed because finally he said yes. So we spent 3 afternoons together for that. And during the conversation, for making the long story short, during the conversation, I asked him if he feels optimistic. He said, no, I don't like the word optimism. I have hope. And at some point, he was explaining what he meant for hope, quoting Puccini, the opera, Puccini, and the Turandot. To tell you the truth, I never imagined to put together Pope Francis and Puccini. So I thought that I misunderstood what he said. So I said, who? And he staring at me saying, Turandot, this way. Then that was a kind of a ha-ha moment. No? There I understood that for him, literature, art, music, then I realized also music, was a part not of his culture, but his own life. And I experienced that many times. For example, I still remember very well Easter, when the Bollettino, the bulletin of the press office of the Holy See was very clear, the Pope won't give a homily because there will be the Urbi et Orbi blessing. And so the talk, the discourse after, before the blessing. But at the end of the gospel, the Pope stood. So I was there, I saw him not sitting, not taking a seat. So I asked myself, why is doing that? There was a silence, and then he started talking. And he gave a wonderful, short, fortunately, short homily. And it was clear for me that what he was saying was kind of a result, I should say, of a meditation on La Strada by Fellini. He didn't quote him, Fellini, but it was clear for me. At the end, on the afternoon, he called me and I said, look, I heard your homily, but he immediately said, well, it's La Strada, it's Fellini. So there, again, I realized that he doesn't use literature. Literature is part of his own life, his own magisterium. The final proof of what I'm saying now is an apostolic exhortation called Querida Amazonia. Querida Amazonia is the document at the end of the synod on Amazonia. And what he did is that he expressed his own magisterium through the voices of 17 poets. Almost all of them are known. So if you look for information, you go online and you find blogs or kind of things, so no books. And wonderful poetry, unknown. Some of them are known, some others, most of them unknown. And what he did was very profound. He, probably for the first time, so John Paul II was a poet, and many other popes, included Benedict XVI, quoted poets and artists. But the quotes of Francis were not just quotations. So he led the poets to express the magisterium, one of its highest point, so the apostolic exhortation. So for expressing the papal magisterium, he led the poets speaking. So it's for the first time, maybe, that the magisterium of the Pope, of a Pope, is expressed in poetic form.
You mentioned your interview with Papa Francesco. It appeared in September 2013 and had a phenomenal effect. The Extemporaneous Encyclical, it was called. And so much of what played out in Francis' pontificate was prefigured there, but especially for those of us who are writers, the presence of half a dozen writers in that interview was so significant. Borges, Dostoevsky, Manzoni, I Promessi Sposi, Holderlin. Can you kind of represent for the audience here that part of the interview and what it meant for him to bring those authors into the discussion and so naturally?
He quoted many authors, you listed them, and I had some private conversation with him about literature, and I realized how many authors he knew, and those have been very close to his heart. I want to mention one you didn't mention, of course, because it's almost unknown in the world. It's Nino Costa. He's from Piemonte, and as you know, Pope Francis, the ancestors of Pope Francis came from Piemonte. Again, for talking about experience, I was in his room in Santa Marta, so at some point he took a very big book published by Einaudi, which is a very prestigious publisher in Italy, with a handmade cover with bright colors made by a friend of him. So it was a very relevant book for him. And this book of poetry, Nino Costa, used to write in Piemontese dialect. So at some point he read one of them, but he was reading, but at the same time was able to memorize, to speak, he learned the poetry by heart, so he didn't have any problem for remembering the verses. And finally, at the end, again, he stared at me saying, "Do you like it?" And my answer was, I didn't understand anything because it was in Piemontese. So could you please translate it into Spanish? Maybe it's easier for me. So Nino Costa, who is not a great poet like Hölderlin, like Borges, but with whom he established a very deep relationship. So being a poet means have a different vision of the world. So he was kept not by the great poets, but by poets, even young poets. When he was already Pope, of course, he received the poems written by a young guy called Luca Milanese. Nobody knows him, I guess. Well, he decided to write a preface of this book of poems. And so I met Luca Milanese, and the Pope sent me this preface because he realized that there was something interesting. I never heard of a Pope who wrote a preface to a young, unknown poet. Dante, of course, everybody, all the popes wrote about Dante. But to Luca Milanese. But that happened even when he was a Jesuit superior of his house. I want to ask, there's a translator here, yes, to translate for us page 12. It's about the dimore di carne, those verses. She's reading from this book, Viva la Poesia, which is just in Italian for now, is going to be published in other languages, which is a book that collects all the writings of Pope Francis about literature. So I want you to listen these few sentences. There is the...
Page 12?
Page 12, yes.
The ones that you have marked?
Yep,
Okay.
please.
So Pope Francis writes, "The poetic word resides in the flesh of the heart of man, and at the same time, it has some weight The weight is carried by wings that haven't yet taken off.
Thank you. This was from the preface that Pope Francis wrote about the poems written by a Jesuit, Argentinian Jesuit, Osvaldo Pol, who is pretty unknown, right? Do you know Osvaldo Pol? Have you ever heard about? Beautiful poems. A Jesuit poet, which is pretty rare after Jeremiah Hopkins. But I was very struck. Again, so he mentioned already the big poets, okay? So I want to make known the unknown that Pope Francis knew quite well. And so for him, the poetry as the weight of the flesh, and so has his own house, home in our heart. But at the same time, the poetry feels the weight of wings, but not the wings of the bird who is already flying, so no weight at all. No? Because for a bird who flies, I mean, the wings don't have any weight, but of a bird who is still there. So it's interesting, this balance and the profundity, you know, he has in his way of understanding poetry. And so for him also, there's another quotation I would like you to read, page 58.
Okay.
Her voice is much better than mine, so you can enjoy it.
And after all, at all times, man tries to understand and express the best of what comes out of himself. And hence, man, as time goes by, changes the way he perceives himself, the ways he sees himself. So one thing is man who expresses himself by sculpting the statue, the Nike of Samothracia. And another thing is the one by Caravaggio's, or by Chagall, or again by Salvador Dali. And even the forms of expression whereby the truth is expressed may be faceted and multiform and coming in many shapes. And this is rather necessary so as to allow the passing of the message, of the evangelical message, in its unchangeable meaning.
Thank you. What do you think? What do you see in this passage? That there is an unchangeable meaning of the gospel, but at the same time, he quoted Nike of Samothracia, Caravaggio, Chagall, Dali, saying, so artists, as to say that we change, and arts and poetry is a mirror of these big changes. So we have to face the challenge of the human being as it is today, at our time. And times are change, and we have to change even our way of spreading the gospel. So I think this is I don't know if I answered your question. The last thing I can share with you, it's at some point since just for quoting a big author, when I asked him, which kind of writers do you like the most? And he answered the tragic ones. And which one in particular? He said, for example, I really love Dostoevsky. But then again, what's the work of Dostoevsky you like the most? I was thinking about the big, the Fratelli Karamazov brothers and so on. But he said, no, Notes from Underground. Notes from the Ground. So even of big authors, he was kept by works which are not the most relevant, the most important. What really struck me was that when in one of my conversations with Martin Scorsese, at some point I told him that. So he likes him, and he said, "Oh, Dostoevsky is a great author, and I really like him." And he asked me again, which work he likes the most, and I answered, Notes from Dostoevsky. He jumped from his chair saying, "But this is what I like the most, because Taxi Driver is my version of Notes of Underground." And I know that when they got together at some point, they start talking about Dostoevsky.
It's really striking that of the authors that you just discussed, they're modern and postmodern figures, artists. So you have Chagall and Dali, you have Dostoevsky. Before we move on to Fratelli Tutti, I was startled, I think, reading in the interview that you did with Pope Francis, that not only was he acquainted with the literature of Borges, but he was personally acquainted with Borges.
Oh, yes.
Did you discuss Borges and,
Yes.
his work?
Not the work, but we talk about Borges, because I mean I know that he liked them, but he's not one of the most quoted poet in his works. What I realized that he had a personal a relationship with them, more than being a great fan of his poetry. This is what I realized. What happened? When he was 28, he was sent by his superior to do what we call regency. It's a step inside of our formation as a Jesuit. So he was sent to teach literature in the high school. And he realized that his students didn't like the classics. They want to read something different, something more modern. So he was asking, he was put this question to himself as a professor: what can I do for helping them to enjoy literature? And he realized the only way available for him is to taught them how to write, to make them writers. And so he started giving lesson of creative writing. That really struck me. And so he even built a group of writers, a group of people interested in theater, and a rock band. Very few people know that. The Shouters, this is the title he gave to them, the Shouters. So a rock band founded by Pope Francis. That's true. I even interviewed some of his students. And I have two experiences. So what happened with Borges? So he asked his students to write novels, and he collected the most beautiful novels, the short stories, and he asked Borges, because he was friend of his secretary. So he reached out Borges, and he asked him to write a preface to those novels. And Borges answered, and he did it. And he even took a bus for going from Buenos Aires to Santa Fe, if you will remember, for meeting those students. Can you imagine? So the two of them, Borges and Pope Francis, had a conversation, and I realized that he was very, very grateful for that. So writing was a living experience. But I can also mention two experiences which are very relevant for me with his students. One is a performer, now is a performer and director in Germany. So he moved to Germany. So I interviewed him for knowing more about Jorge Mario Bergoglio as a teacher of literature. And he answered, we had a conversation. At some point he said, I can send you some materials. And he sent me the, how do you say the competing class in English? The classwork, yes. The class works. Homework, this is the homework, yes, the homework. I mean, he was just a student, and he kept the homework revised by Bergoglio along all his life. So he had it in Germany. Do you have your homework in your house corrected by your professors? That really struck me. But why? I said, why you have this homework with you in Germany now? Because he said, read the notes. And there were many notes. And I realized that Bergoglio was able to read the soul of that student, taking advantage of mistakes or misunderstanding or whatever. So he brought with him all this homework because there were notes who had been very relevant for his own life. And another witness was from another one who lives in Washington now. He's a great cook, very famous. And when I used to go to Georgetown for the board meetings, I used to visit him. And he said, look, Antonio, I come from a very, middle-class family. So I bless all the money my parents spent for sending me to the Jesuit school, because there I met Professor Bergoglio. And that man made me a free person.
Our theme is encounter, human fraternity in a divided world. And that comes from Fratelli Tutti, the 2020 encyclical. And it's an important part of Francis's legacy, this notion of literature as a space or occasion of encounter. Before we go to questions, can you just articulate in what sense literature is a means of encounter for Pope Francis and so for us?
We might read another passage, page 142. I was not ready for the questions, so I just took some notes from the book where I collected all these works of Francis.
To just use an expression of a Jesuit poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, I would like to launch an appeal. In our times of crisis, a crisis that is affecting the world order, which are times as well of war, of great polarizations, of very rigid paradigms, of grave challenges affecting our climate and even our economic climate. We need some innovations, some new inspirations for a new language. We need a language made of stories, of powerful images by writers, poets, artists, capable of addressing the world and shouting it out as an evangelical message so as to allow us to truly see Jesus.
It seems that a very pious passage, which is not at all. He said, it resounds in the world an Leiden echo. This was the start of what he said, a Leiden echo. It's a quote by Gerald Manley Hopkins, who wrote a poet called The Leiden Echo and the Golden Echo. So you realize that in the world, there is kind of a Leiden echo today. Look what is happening in Ukraine. Look what is happening in Gaza. So, and in different places in the world, in South Sudan, in Congo. So there is a Leiden echo, and he used the verse of a poet for saying that. So today, this echo, you feel this echo, this leaden echo. So he made an appeal. In this time of crisis, so big polarizations, the world order upside down, we need a lot of challenges about fraternity, about climate change, about economy. We need the genius, the geniality of what? Of new politicians, of good economists, people interested in statistics? No. He said, we need the genius of a new language, of stories, images, strong images of writers, poets, and artists. This is crazy. I mean, I never heard a leader, because Francis was probably the only moral leader of the world who had a very profound global impact. I never heard a world leader saying that, considering that we live in a big world disorder, we need poets and artists. Why he said that? Because they are, as he said in other conversations, one with the dicastery, and with the meeting organized by the dicastery artists, he said that the artists are able to give us new versions of the world. New versions of the world. So in order to solve the problems, in order to build a better fraternity, in order to overcome all polarizations and divisions in the world, we need to see the world differently. If you don't see the world differently, you always keep the same solutions which don't work, are not working now at all. So this is why he said that. So for building a new fraternity, we need the voices of poets. We need the visions of the artists.
What's striking hearing you saying that is that we are here in a room full of writers and artists, which hasn't always been the case in the life of the church. Let's hear from some of the writers and artists, either with their own insights or with questions for you, Father Spadaro.
Okay.
I see a hand up over on the right.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I am Carlo Marino. I'd like to ask you if we are not in a moment where we are going to confront with a new revolution, the revolution of artificial intelligence. And at the moment, we need, above all through writers and artists, to give the words their appropriate meaning. Because like Confucius said in old China, in order to change the reality, we have to give the right name to the things. So I think this is the moment where in a liquid world, we are obliged as artists, as writers, to confirm the words and think in a certain way. Because I think today words and think don't coincide anymore. Thank you.
Did you discuss artificial intelligence with Pope Francis?
No, but he wrote in his last encyclical, the Lexic Notes, a wonderful passage. I want to read it to you now. I found it very fast in through internet. So in the age of artificial intelligence, we cannot forget that to say what is human, we need poetry and love. So this is what he said. He made many examples of daily life. Your question is a very interesting question, a very deep question. Was interesting that the day before Pope Leo was elected, so on May the 7th, I wrote an article on La Repubblica, which is a new Italian newspaper, saying that the first and most important topic with which the new Pope should confront is exactly the artificial intelligence, and I explained why. Then the day afterwards, he was elected, and then he explained that his name was taken. I mean, he chose his name exactly because the challenge of the artificial intelligence. So that made me thinking in what I think is that we are very centered in talking about the ethical aspect of the artificial intelligence, which is nice, which is good. But at the same time, I think we should face more the theoretical and even the spiritual challenges of the artificial intelligence, because there is no way to get back from there. We have to be aware of that. So no way. Second one, the artificial intelligence is not just a tool. It's affecting our way of thinking. Our thought is able to think instead of us, we say, which is not true. But this is what we experienced. And this is a big challenge. And that might affect our way of understanding the world. At the same time, we are not able to deal with this challenge exactly because we are too much anthropocentric. This is my position. But there are other setting, our different visions about the world and the human being, which might be useful to us for understanding better how to deal with artificial intelligence. One of them is not the Confucian you quote, but is the Taoist one, the Tao, which is not anthropocentric, and that has a completely different approach to technology. We experienced this with Tom Bancroft in Santa Clara University years ago, thanks to a meeting, Chatham House Rules meeting, with 6 experts from Europe and the Vatican and the US, and 6 experts from China. And there, that was for me, another very haha moment. There I understand that there is a completely different understanding of technology. So what we are saying now about the artificial intelligence is too much shaped by our anthropological approach. So what Pope Francis did at the end, especially with Laudato Si, which is a perfect companion for understanding artificial intelligence, even if it was written years ago. So the Pope Francis put a challenge to our way of thinking with many documents. The Dicastery for Culture and Education published a document called Antiqua et Nova. Nothing special there, but it's a mirror of the situation. But we have much work to do, considering also our different ways of understanding the notion of intelligence. But again, what Pope Francis wrote in his last encyclical is very important. In the age of artificial intelligence, we cannot forget that to say what is human, we need poetry and love.
There's a question in the back.
Buongiorno. Good morning.
Good morning.
Claudio Betti. I'm from Australian Catholic University. Now, amazingly, this and Comunità di Sant'Egidio, both of them. amazingly, this meeting of ours happens in a very peculiar moment. Yesterday it was Pentecost. And at Pentecost, the Acts of the Apostles speak about the disciples who finally start to speak new languages. And this, I think, it's crucial, especially what Father Spadaro said today. I think that, of course, we have to go back at the first century when these apostles or the disciples were poor Galileans who just spoke languages, probably a dialect of Galilee. And all of a sudden, they started speaking languages that everybody understood. And I think that this meeting we have today is very important because it tells us that we need to find new languages. As you were saying, Father Spadaro, I think that this is the role of writers, this is the role of artists, that will create a new language that everybody understands. And in a world that is fast changing, that is divided, we need something that puts us together. And I think this is also a homework, as you were saying, for all of us who are in the church, that of being able to riraccontare, I'm not sure how to say it in English, to tell once again, to retell or to narrate and in a new way that everybody understands. I am a director of a campus where I meet 1,500 students every year. And I can tell you the new generation we are meeting is very different from the one that I come from, or for the one that most of us is able to understand more. So thank you very much for this meeting, because it tells us both that the time is come and that there is things that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. For probably this was not a question, but I want to answer, asking if you can read page 180. In 81, 81.
81.
81.
Okay. There are things in our lives that at times we are not capable of grasping nor understanding, or for which we do not find the adequate words. And this is also a place where man experiences God, an experience which is always extreme and outperforming us. You cannot just take it, you feel it, and it goes far beyond, and it's always in excess. Experiencing God is as if we were in a bathtub where water falls drop after drop, and after some time it is filled with water which is outflowing.
The word that Pope Francis liked the most, I even asked him for that, so I'm sure about that, is a Spanish word which is desborde, and the verb is desbordar. He used that for the first time actually in this one of the synods about youth, if I will remember, but he used it many times afterwards. It's the word desborde. I don't know how can you translate adequately in English. In Italian, Italian is, it's debordare. It's going beyond the borders. This is the meaning. Being extreme, far beyond, to excess. You get. So this is the word he liked the most. Going out of the border. So the experience of poetry is going beyond the words. This is why he liked it. So you cannot contain the meanings of a poem. So the experience of God is a kind of a deborde. The experience of poetry is a deborde. Even when I interviewed him for the first time in 2013, he said that the Jesuits, He was talking about the Jesuits. Should be a persons of incomplete thought. And then he explained it, incomplete. So he liked not the complete thought, but the incomplete. So which is able to go beyond the borders, beyond even the languages, because when you write poetry, the poetry lives in the language in which it's written. But the poem goes beyond the meaning of the language, even the plain language. An author I really admire, and I read and I wrote about him a book, even, it's Raymond Carver. Many times I made connection between Raymond Carver, an American poet, and Pope Francis, even if Pope Francis never, met, never talked about him, he never heard about him. And I was struck by his last poem. The last poem, I want to quote it because it's written in a very plain language. But this plain language, ordinary language, goes far beyond the ordinary. So goes on the extraordinary dimension of our life. It was very last poem. Late Fragment is the title. He wrote, "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth."
It's a very powerful statement, and I hope we can pick that up over coffee in a few minutes. One last question, though. You've just written a couple of articles in Italian explaining the way that Leo's pontificate builds on some of the themes of Francis' pontificate. I'm thinking of the word, is it si estroversa? But maybe that's not the right connection between this board. Can you spell out where this is going under Pope Leo from what we know so far?
We'll see. It's too early. So it's just 1 month. I love to see connections between Francis and Leo. I just wrote an article for L'Osservatore Romano and saying that the real connection is a word which is in restlessness, because both of them use it many times. And what I found was a strange thing, that I remember that I was in Santa Marta with Pope Francis on August 28, 2013, and for concluding our interview. Then he had to go. But before going, he repeated me twice, inquietudine, then he left. Inquietudine in English is restlessness. This is what he told me. And he was going to the Augustinians, to the church of the Augustinians for celebrating Mass and giving a homily. And he was the general of the Augustinians in 2013, Prevost. And so he was going to give a talk to Prevost in the chapter of the Augustinians. Then Prevost said that he asked the Pope just for courtesy, for inviting him, but he was sure that he was not going to join them, as no popes joined the chapter of the Augustinians, which is a very small order. But the Pope said yes. So Prevost said in a conversation with other Augustinians, said, "My God, what can I do now?" He said yes. So he went there and he gave a wonderful homily. I suggest you to read it about Augustine. And was very striking for me, because I read the homily, of course, in 2013. But the homily he gave to the cardinals, talking about Prevost, the very beginning of the homily was the same that Francis used to give his homily to the Augustinians. That really struck me. So the word restlessness and its interpretation. But one of these interpretation is exactly this word that Paul quoted, una chiesa estroversa, an extroverted church. This is what Leo talked about. And extroversion is another way of talking about desborde, going beyond its border. In one of his speeches, because we talk about Pope Leo now, and especially in the social media discourse, we talk about the mozzetta, the shoes is black, but the mozzetta is red, and then the little stuffed pope that he brought, no? And all this kind of strange little things. But we don't talk about what he is saying. So you should read carefully what he's saying now. And it's very clear that he's talking about an extroverted church without precise borders. And he even asked to go out of our small groups, so not to consider the church as a small group of privileged people, able to understand the gospel, because the truth is ours. What he's saying is completely different. So what he's talking about is about it's an extroverted church that goes beyond. Why? Because it's a missionary church, and Prevost was a missionary person. And Pope Francis made him as a bishop of Chiclayo after his experience of being general of his order. And then from Chiclayo, which is a periphery, the end of the world, for using an expression of Pope Francis, he asked him to go to Rome to be prefect of the dicastery for bishops. And this is another way of talking about how the church must desbordar, must go out of its own limits, even geographical limits, spiritual limits. We are called to go beyond.
It's so striking, and to hear you tell that story, because it's also a literary story. Literature from a Catholic perspective can be said to begin with Augustine and with the Confessions. And the opening line of the Confessions is, "My heart is restless until it rests in you." So when Pope Francis was leaving you to go to the Augustinians, he was quoting a great book as he walked out the door. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much, and I'm so eager to carry forward the conversation over coffee in the next room and through the following sessions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.